Hey everyone, welcome to our next video. In this video, we'll be talking about SSO and OAuth. Most of you might be aware about these two technologies, but the difference might not be clear. So in the next 10 minutes, we'll be talking about the differences, the different type of OAuth, and lots of other things. So without wasting any further time, let's start the video. Okay, so let's start. Before talking about SSO, we first need to understand what is the requirement of SSO. So when you create an application which is holding some kind of resources which are actually related to your user, then you have to maintain some kind of security layer, right? That security layer is responsible to validate the credential so that it can allow only the user which are actually the owner of that resource can access that resource, right? So to allow only particular user to access that resource, you have to implement some kind of security layer, correct? So that security layer with your application is responsible to validate the user credential which has been passed by your user with the stored credential in the database. So far so good, but suppose your organization is not having only single application, it's having number of applications. I have app 2, app 3, or maybe number of apps, let's say n number of apps. So if my organization have to allow this user to access the resources over these different applications, then these applications need to implement a security layer with each of these applications need to ensure that they have a security layer. So the same user, if wanted to access this app 3, has to provide the credential again here, and this security layer will again verify with the database which is associated here. So in this way, what is the problem? The problem is you have to ensure that the databases which are holding the user credentials and the user related data should always be in sync, correct? So syncing of the database is the very big problem. The other problem is you have to maintain a duplicate code, correct? So to ensure that such kind of things never happens, what you can do, you can extract out this responsibility and ensure that there is a service, a separate service which will be responsible to verify the credential on behalf of each application individually. So this security layer will be having a single database which will be having a single copy of all the user related data. So whenever user wanted to access any of this application, instead of providing credential to each application, user will provide the credential to this single security service. And after verifying the credential, the first layer will be passed and user can access any of the applications which are behind that security layer. So the user can now access any of these applications. Okay. So this is a kind of SSO where instead of providing a login facility over each and every application, you are providing a single service or single sign-on facility to the user so that user can sign on to that service and can access any of the application in your organization. There are different ways to implement this SSO. One of the way some of the organization might be using that cookies. So they can use the cookies to implement single sign-on. There is another way which is known as SAML, which is based on XML tokens, and whenever you provide the credentials, some kind of XML token is generated back to the user, and whenever user wanted to access that application again or any of the application, he can provide that same XML token in the subsequent request. And most commonly used nowadays is OAuth, which is based on JSON. So instead of using the XML tokens, as part of subsequent request, you can use JSON request as well. And whenever you are sending any other subsequent request, you have to pass this JSON token, or commonly the implementation commonly used as part of this JSON token is JWT or JWT tokens. So in the subsequent request, you can pass the JWT token, and you can access any of these applications. Okay, so far so good, but there are number of implementation in OAuth itself. There are number of variations or number of flavors of OAuth present nowadays. So let's talk about OAuth also. Okay, so these are the most commonly used OAuth types, one of the most commonly used, and if you consider the security reasons, then 3-lagged authorization is the most secured one. After that, there is also a possibility you can use the 2-lagged authorization, and there is another one, the password type, where you just use the password for your to get the authorization token. The client credential, which is most commonly used for inter-service communication rather than the with the public-facing clients, and the refresh token, which is basically allows you to get the access token multiple times over a period of time. So a refresh token has a kind of very extended validity where you can get the number of access token. Okay, so let's talk about the 3-lagged authorization first. Okay, suppose this particular user wanted to access the resource or this resource server, or this can be an application which we assumed as part of our SSO example. So user wanted to access this application. So to access this application, user needs some kind of access token or some kind of credential verification, right? So as we discussed, the credential verification is no more part of this resource server. Basically, that will be done by this auth server. Okay, so let's say the user wanted to log into this application. So when user sends the request for login, the client sends the response of a login page, but this login page is not from this client. This login page is basically redirects user to the login page of auth server. So then if user provides the credentials on this login page, those credentials will be going directly to the auth server instead of this client web app or mobile application. Okay, so and one more thing, as part of this login page, there is a redirect URL also coming. Okay, so if user, so let's see what is the use of redirect URL. So when user is providing this credential to this auth server and auth server finds this good, then auth server redirects user to the URL which has been provided as part of this login page response. So now the user is landed onto the page which has been set by the client when the login page response was sent to the user. Okay, so far so good. So as part of this response, auth server provide some kind of auth code. Okay, so this auth code signifies that the client app, web app or mobile application is authorized to use this application, or actually authorized based on these resources that this particular user is okay. But so this auth code signifies that the user credential that user is passing here are valid, and yeah, that's it. But it doesn't yet allow this user to access this application because this is the auth code which just signifies that user is valid. Okay, so now to access the resource, now client app will be sending a request for access token. Okay, using this auth code, the client will send the request for access token, and after that, in response, authorization server will give that access token to the client. Now any subsequent request, in any of the subsequent requests, the client app can send the subsequent request with this access token. So the request, so in any subsequent request, the client can send the request plus this access token. So if those things are fine, then the resource will be given back to this client. So this is the 3-lagged implementation of OAuth. Okay, now let's talk about the 2-lagged approach. In the 2-lagged approach, or I would say the implicit OAuth flow, so you can think here, these two steps are actually redundant. If let's say the user is providing the credential here, instead of providing the auth code, auth server can directly provide the access token, isn't it? So these seems to be redundant, but those are required for some security related things, and that's why most recommended way is to use the 3-lagged instead of 2-lagged. But just for the knowledge purpose, I'm saying this, that you can, I mean, this is also a way where you can skip those steps and directly send the access token. So that will be the 2-lagged approach, or the 2-lagged OAuth type. Okay, so now let's talk about the password OAuth type. There is a major difference between this and the 3-lagged and 2-lagged approach. So instead of getting the login page from the OAuth server, client itself will send its login page. So now if let's say user is sending a login request, the login page will be sent by this client page, the client application. Actually, it's not redirecting user to the OAuth server. So when user provide the credential here, it will be taken by this the client application and then sent to the OAuth server. Okay, so when after this, if OAuth server finds those credentials okay, the access token will be provided to the client application. So now in subsequent requests, the access token, so now in the subsequent request, this the access token can be passed as an header, and this client can access the resource. Okay, so now let's talk about the client credential flow of OAuth type. So in this flow, which is basically used when you are using inter-service communication and you want to authenticate the other client, the service, okay, whether that service is allowed to access your resources or not. So in this way, instead of going through that login page, the client itself can provide the client credential to this OAuth, okay, the OAuth server, sorry. So in response of this client credential, the client will be provided with access token. Now in subsequent request, the client can send the request with OAuth token, okay, and the resource can be accessed using this way. Okay, this is not basically used for the client facing application and the mobile application. This is basically used when you want to do inter-service communication and behind the scene, and the service to server communication. So this is majorly used in such kind of scenarios. Okay, now so far so good, but let's say whatever we are dealing with here is the access tokens. We are providing client with the access token, and access token can be used by the client or the user for a number of requests, correct? Which is not good. If that access token goes to any wrong hand, then that particular user can use that access token to access resources for infinite times. So to ensure that such kind of things never happen, access token usually have a certain validity, let's say 30 minutes. So after 30 minutes, you will again see a login page, and you have to again provide your credential to get new access token, which is also not good, right? It will hamper your user experience. So what we can do, instead of providing only the access token to the end user, the auth server can provide access token plus a refresh token, which is another OAuth type. So as part of that refresh token, so let's say after 30 minutes access token is expired, then you can use the refresh token to get another access token for another 30 minutes. A refresh token usually have a longer validity compared to access token. So in this way, these access token plus refresh token can allow a very good user experience, can ensure the security also. Okay, so this is all about OAuth. Also, we discussed a number of variations about OAuth. I hope you like this video. Thanks for watching this. See you next time. Have a good day. Bye.